Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this webcast, Designing a Performance Management Process that Drives Performance, sponsored by Engagedly. This webcast has been pre-approved for HRCI and can be submitted for SHRM credit. Please be sure to attend the complete webcast in order to receive your credits. If you have any questions during the webcast, click on the Q&A tab in your webinar controls and type them there. A new tab will open in your browser with the webcast survey. Please be sure to complete it as soon as the webcast is ended. It's now my pleasure to turn it over to Engagedly for their presentation.
Thank you, Hester, and thank you, HR.com, for organizing this. It's an honor to be here. Such a wonderful group. We have a lot of participants, so it's exciting. So the performance management is a very hot topic, and it's always seems to be a hot topic for ages, and it has evolved over time. So today I have the honor and pleasure of joining and having Edie on this presentation. She's a very, very experienced and academic in this subject. Couldn't ask for somebody better to talk about the performance management process. So just to give a little bio on Edie, Edie Goldberg, Ph.D., is the founder and president of E.L. Goldberg and Associates in Menlo Park, California. She earned a degree in IO psychology from University of Albany, SUNY. She made her name as an expert in the field of talent strategy and organizational effectiveness. Her practice focuses on designing human resources processes and programs to attract, engage, develop, and retain employees. She's also the past chairperson of HR People Plus Strategy, the SHRM Executive Network, and she's a board member of the SHRM Foundation. Well, welcome to this webinar, Edie, and we are really eagerly looking forward to getting your thoughts and your wisdom and what the research says about the performance management that actually drives performance.
Thank you so much, Sri. I'm excited to be here. Thank you all for joining us. I just want to let you know we will have time at the end for some questions. So go ahead and put your questions in the chat. And we'll be monitoring that throughout the session so that we can get to them later. But I want to kind of start off with what I think is a really startling statistic. So would you be surprised to learn that only 23% of employees strongly agree that their manager provides them with meaningful feedback? You guys, that's less than a quarter. And that's just kind of sad. That's not the state of affairs that it should be. But for those employees who do strongly agree that their manager provides them with meaningful feedback, they are 3.5 times as likely to be engaged at work. So that's really important because we know that engaged employees are more productive. So maybe the path to greater productivity and performance may very well be through ensuring employees are getting meaningful feedback. And I might add to that, and coaching. So let me just kind of give you an overview of what we're going to be talking about in our session today. We're going to start off talking about the changing nature of work and employee expectations, kind of a setup for why and how we need to change our processes. I'm going to share some insights from recent research that I conducted on kind of what are those practices that truly make an impact in the organization. And then kind of bring that home to talk about my recommendations for designing a process that enables great performance. And then Sri and I are going to entertain some questions here at the end. So we all know that performance management is broken, right? This is no surprise. And I think that to kind of start on your journey about how to fix the process within your own company, it's important for you to step back and say, what is the purpose of performance management in our company? And then make sure that you're designing your process with that purpose in mind. And remember, performance management can't do everything. So we really need to think about what is the purpose? What is the singular driving purpose of why you do performance management? I propose to you that the real purpose here worth pursuing in what we call performance management today is to improve individual and organizational performance. That should be your singular focus. Through that lens, performance management helps us translate strategy and organizational priorities into individual priorities. And it provides direction for employees to align their efforts to the goals and objectives of the company. And it ensures that the right things are getting worked on and that there's help and support available to make progress towards those organizational goals. Sounds pretty good, right? Well, let's set some context for why our old approach to performance management and performance appraisal isn't really meeting the needs for today's organization. Now, there are a whole lot of factors that are reshaping organizations today, and that really demand us to rethink our approach to all of our talent management processes. Our workforce is largely comprised of knowledge workers who are dispersed globally, and workplace demographics have been changing some time. And that continues to change the makeup of our workforces. So we have a workforce that's kind of leaning millennial, but representative of 4 different generations in the workplace. Now, the fourth industrial revolution is bringing us new technologies that are creating economic game changers as we engage in new economies and have new ways of working that were never possible before. Digital technologies have changed the ways in which we operate and the need to be more agile and pivot in new directions based on our changing business environment. And then we have this new work ecosystem that democratizes our work and puts more control in the hands of our employees because they have the tools that help them work on their own terms, like remotely. Our global teams collaborate through social collaboration platforms today to help those teams get their work done. So we're communicating more digitally than we are face-to-face. And that's been amplified during the pandemic since the majority of professionals have been working remotely. And work today is really complex. And as a result, we're seeing a huge rise in the need to collaborate across organizational boundaries. Today's matrixed and team-based structures means that more and more employees have shared accountabilities for getting their work done. And with increased global competition and the importance of new skills in the workplace, the battle for talent has never been greater. But companies are having a hard time, as you well know, finding and keeping the right talent. Development plays a critical role in this equation, and it's more important than ever before. So many of you have heard the phrase that the half-life of skills today is only 5 years. What this means is half of everything an employee knows will be obsolete in 5 years because of changing technology, changing business environment, et cetera. So it's now a business imperative that employees are continuously learning because their skills are going to become quickly out of date. The impact of this half-life of skills is that our talent shortages are at an all-time high in the past decade. And this doesn't really show any sign of abating anytime soon. And while this graph shows the talent shortages within the United States, globally, we see the same trends. Over half of the companies in this world are having a hard time executing on their business strategy because they cannot find the talent that they're looking for. According to a study from Deloitte, over 8 out of 10 global managers view learning as important or a very important issue for the organization. And Glassdoor data reveals that 42% of millennials are likely to leave if they're not learning fast enough. But LinkedIn's 2018 Workforce Learning Report shared with us that 93% of employees say they would actually stay with their company longer if their company invested in their career. According to a Deloitte Human Capital Trends study, organizations are really shifting from these hierarchical structures to more interconnected, flexible teams that become more agile and more customer focused. More and more companies are relying on our old traditional hierarchies more for governance purposes. And then they're leveraging these, what we call purpose-built networks of teams to really get the day-to-day work accomplished. And today, because of the pandemic, this idea of staffing project-based teams has taken off like a rocket. When business priorities change, employees have to be agile and shift their priorities to focus on those things that matter the most today. And as a result, we're seeing a shift from the idea of setting and forgetting goals to enabling more agile goal setting methodologies. In fact, research has demonstrated that companies that review and revise goals more often have better performance than companies that set either annual goals or semi-annual goals. So that moves us from using goals really as a way to keep score on our employees, as a way to kind of direct their focus on those objectives that are the most important to the company at that time. Now, today's performance management processes assume that individuals should be setting their goals individually, although often they're tied to kind of a department or a company-wide goal objective. Individuals are held accountable to their own goals, and usually only their manager and them have kind of line of sight to the progress against those goals. And while team-based work has been around for centuries, the complexity of our work has driven an increase in the amount of collaboration that is required in today's contemporary workplaces. So organizations are becoming flatter, leaner, and more agile. And at the same time, jobs are becoming more complex and more global in scope. All these factors make it much more difficult for any one person to do a job in isolation of everybody else. My colleague Rob Cross tells us that collaboration consumes an eye-popping 85% of most people's work weeks. So today, more than ever before, it's probably more appropriate for individuals to either set team-based goals or to share their goals and progress against those goals with their teammates. That way, the entire team can track how they're performing against their goals, and then they can lend a hand when needed to help meet those objectives. In addition, because of the way in which we're operating today, I would argue that peers or collaborators may be a better source for feedback than solely relying on one's manager, whom you may see or interact with much less frequently. So whether a company uses a 360 process to evaluation or kind of more of a completely crowdsourced performance management solution, getting input beyond one's manager is a direction we absolutely should be driving toward. Now, hybrid and the rise of remote work have created a need for some, well, I'll say nuanced changes to the way in which we manage performance. Frequent communications are more important than ever before. And previously, managers really managed by walking around, right? They saw what people were doing and who we were meeting with. And today, that actually requires more intentional conversations to learn the same things. And the same goes for collaborating with your colleagues. Previously, you could just pop into somebody's office and ask them a question, but now we're chatting through technology and having to set up perhaps some time to chat. While we will already trending towards more frequent check-ins around performance, that's become even more important in this hybrid and remote world of work. But remember, it's about checking in, not checking up on our employees. It's about asking how things are going so the manager can provide the coaching and support that they need to help an employee make progress towards their goal. It's not about checking up on somebody because you don't trust that they're actually working. I think that, if I dare say this, there's been a really big kind of silver lining to the COVID experience in our workplaces. Managers have expressed more empathy towards their employees. They've tried to get to know people more on a personal basis, and really tried to understand their personal situations and what might be getting in the way of them able to achieve their goals. And that's led to a greater sense of belonging with employees. And I really hope that that continues as we progress and move towards this new normal in our world of work. Now, as we talk about performance management, I don't want you to forget about your freelancers and your contractors, because they're really critical for getting work accomplished today. But our traditional manager-led, employee-focused programs won't drive high performance on your teams if a large percentage of those contributors are actually outside of your performance management system. You're not setting goals with them, giving them feedback or coaching. And I know that there are some legal requirements that we have to manage around the independent contractor having control over their own work. But I'm a contractor, that's what I do, right? I'm a consultant, so I'm always external to the organization. And you can bet I always have goals in my client contracts. So that's kind of a natural setup. And getting feedback and knowing how things are going and how I can be more effective only helps us all move forward together. So I think we need to think about these relationships and how we bring them more into the performance management situation. So what are the implications for all these changes in our world of work and how we think about performance management today? Well, certainly the traditional process of setting goals annually is out of pace with what most organizations need today to deal with all the shifting priorities that we have. So the process isn't agile enough to keep up with our pace of business. And in addition, we tend to set these individual goals, and we really need to recognize that more and more of our work is done as part of a team. So perhaps we should be making room for setting team-based goals or measuring performance based on what the team is accomplishing. The geographic dispersion of our workforce means that often that manager and their employee aren't co-located. So the manager might not always be the best source of feedback for your employees. And research indicates that our current processes aren't meeting the needs of employees because they're not getting feedback frequently enough. To move beyond, we need to move beyond occasional feedback to what I call ongoing coaching for performance, and inviting individuals who have observed our performance to provide feedback, not just our manager. Now, I've interviewed so many leaders about their performance management processes, and inevitably, I get told that by the time it comes to development planning, people are simply too exhausted. They've run out of time in the meeting. It just doesn't get the focus that it needs. But with the changing nature of work, development is more important than ever before. So we need to make sure that we put more focus, not less focus, on the development planning aspects of our process. And there's been a lot written lately about whether or not managers are even capable of accurately evaluating an employee's performance. Our own personal biases play a huge role in how we evaluate people. And after speaking with a whole lot of managers in different client situations, I can argue that your managers don't actually need some systemic process and rating scale to know who are their highest performers and who are their lowest performers. They pretty much know that based on what people are getting done. So the need to rate and label people is more for, I would say, other talent management systems necessarily than for managing performance per se. And then finally, when pay for performance was first introduced, we had bigger budgets for pay increases, and there was a greater ability to differentiate pay based on performance. Today, with merit budgets averaging about 3%, there is little ability to meaningfully differentiate payouts based on performance. And I will argue later that we really need to shift from pay for performance to focusing more on market-based pay, and then providing more team-based rewards and organizational level rewards to recognize the collaborative efforts that employees should be focusing on today. So I've given you a lot to kind of chew on here. And it's time for you guys to get involved in the conversation and to share in the chat. As you think about how your business has evolved over time, what elements of your performance management process reflect practices that really don't meet your business pace, the needs or expectations of your employees? So go ahead, throw your comments in the chat. There are a lot of you here. So what I find in these is that peer-to-peer sharing is so important. Shri, you want to get us, kind of kick us off? What do you think about some of this?
Yeah, no, so there are two ways to answer this question on what we do, but I will probably answer from what we see from our client base. Engagely works with over 400 organizations, and we talk to several thousand organizations every year. One of the things that people are struggling with is compensation management, on how do you do pay for performance or compensation, justifying that. That's obviously a big one. And the way in the last couple of years, Edie, you've been a pioneer in the space of trying to decouple performance reviews and ratings from compensation. I think people are struggling with that. I think that's a big one. But I'll stop there because there's a bunch of feedback on this chat as well.
So what I'm seeing here in the chat is a lot of that annual, only doing it annually.
Pay for performance, rating linked to merit. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of pay for performance related feedback here as well.
Yeah.
Timely feedback is a big one. I think timely feedback is a tough one, right? Most people don't actually want to be the bad guy, even as a manager, to give feedback. So I think people struggle with that, and that's important. So now people just wait till the end of the year to do the review and give this surprise. Hey, you got maybe a 2, and here's why. And the employee's like, what? I thought it was a 4, right? Right.
And we're going to get a lot more into, kind of why that annual process, it needs to change. It needs to be more of a continuous process. So I'm going to keep going in the chat, you guys, and keep sharing. And I'm going to get into some research because everyone wants to know what's the latest that's going on in performance management. And this is some research that I developed with my colleague, Alan Colquette. We actually just wrote a performance management book chapter, which is not coming out till next year. Publishing takes a really long time. But we wanted to get some really good data to support what we thought were kind of the practices of where we needed to move. So I'm excited to share some of the highlights from that. And I'm going to sprinkle in some research from other people as I do this. So just a little bit about our research. We collected data at the very end of 2020. So the report really kind of came out in 2021. And the people who participated in this were, 113 people who were responsible for performance management within their company. You can see kind of a sample of some of the participating companies. So this is definitely, companies that you respect and might want to emulate. But so the people who participated, they were either the head of performance management, the director or vice president of talent management, or the chief HR officer. A variety of sizes of companies, everything from kind of, I think, a little bit more startup to really, really large companies. So consistent with what we've been reading in the popular press, participants just don't feel good about their process. Only about 7% of participants said that they had achieved their intended goal. Now, truth be told here, most people kind of waffled on the question because 78% of them said they somewhat achieved their goal. So yeah, but we also asked participants a more interesting question. We asked, what is your return on investment of your process? That is based on the time and the money and the effort that you put into it. What did you get back in terms of motivation, performance, engagement? And employees rated their ROI on a 5-point scale from very low to very high. And here again, we see less than 25% said that their ROI was high to very high. That's not great. In fact, 31.4% said it was low to very low. So needless to say, if you're unhappy with your performance management process, you are in very good company. So here is a whole bunch of kind of research points that we all know, right? That performance management hasn't been going well. In our study, we found that 86% of the participants said they either had just changed their process or they thought that they'd be changing it in the next 2 years. So there's a lot of change because we're not happy with what we're getting. Less than half of the people think their reviews are accurate. And then there's all this data showing pay for performance does not work. So we need to be thinking about new ways to address how we pay people, because pay for performance as a strategy is not very successful. And I'm going to address that at the end. So let's just say we get a big fail here on how we deliver to our stakeholders. Now, for me, in our research, this was kind of one of the pieces of data that we got back that really stunned us. What you see in the red bar here is we ask people, what is the main purpose of performance management as implemented in your company? And here you see a majority of people say it's to evaluate employees to pay for performance, and then maybe secondarily to drive and improve performance. But then we asked a follow-up question, which is, what should be the purpose of your performance management process? And overwhelmingly, practitioners said it's to drive and improve performance, and secondarily to provide feedback to develop employees. The larger the organization, the bigger the gap between how it was designed and what they thought how they thought it should be designed. So this is shocking. Practitioners know what they should be doing, but their processes aren't designed like that. Here is another piece of kind of interesting contradictory feedback. We asked which element is most important to driving motivation and performance. Now, I thought people were going to say goal setting because I'm an industrial organizational psychologist, and I know that the research on goal setting is that's how we motivate performance. But here, overwhelmingly, feedback was the #1 answer about how we drive and motivate performance. And I get that because it's kind of progress towards our goal, right? It's feedback on that. But then we asked, which element are you the most happy with? And here people said it was goal setting. In fact, they were least happy with their feedback process. So it's the most important, but we're least happy with that process. That kind of goes back to the research that I shared from Gallup, that we're not really executing on that feedback element. So let's hear a little bit from you. We have a poll here that has just popped up. What element of the performance management process is most responsible for disengaging and demotivating employees? We want to hear from you. Everybody's got to kind of pick one of the 4 items. What is most responsible for disengaging and demotivating employees? Do you think it's goal setting? You think it's getting feedback from my manager? Do you think it's the evaluation, or do you think it's this pay for performance process? What do you think, Sri? You're on mute.
I said it's got to be evaluation by a long shot.
You think so?
But we'll see. We'll see. I'm speculating. But if I was a betting man, and sometimes I am, I think I would bet on that.
Oh, yes, indeed. So 49% of you said it was evaluation. In fact, in my research, 65% of the participants said that it was evaluation. So here the results were only 6% thought it was goal setting, 16% thought it was the feedback process, 49% said evaluation, and 30% said pay for performance. Thank you. You can all close those results on your screen. You know, it's interesting that most of us believe that the evaluation process is the most responsible for disengaging and demotivating employees. But as I showed you in the very beginning, it is the primary purpose of performance management as implemented. So think about that, okay? Let's move on. I love this graphic here because I think this is super interesting research. David Rock and his colleagues who popularized the SCARF model, which they're from the Neuro Leadership Institute, and their SCARF model essentially says that our current approach to performance management creates a fear response in most employees. Rock and his colleagues collaborated with my co-author on this research, Alan Colquette, who at the time was the head of Eli Lilly's performance management system. And this is kind of how to read this research. At Eli Lilly, they did a pulse survey to look at employee engagement every single month. So they looked at data over a couple of years. And what they found was that February mark is right when they did their performance management process, right? So they rated employees and they did their adjustments and their bonuses. And for 85% of their employee population, anyone who got a 2 to a 4 in their, or really a 1 to a 4 on their 5-point rating scale, employee engagement dipped. And it didn't just dip for a month or a couple of weeks or whatever. It actually dipped for more than an entire quarter of their annual process. And this data really painted their business case for eliminating ratings. Even those people who got a 5 out of 5 on their rating scale, they had a slight dip in their engagement scores right after they got performance reviews. But Eli Lilly had previously demonstrated that engagement was positively related to business performance. We've seen this from many companies. And so when they looked at this and they said our employee engagement dropped for an entire business quarter and then some, that rating employees clearly isn't something that we should be doing because we're actually damaging our business. So very interesting research that has kind of led a lot of companies to eliminate ratings as part of the process. So with all that as background, I want to get into my key recommendations for designing a process to enable greater performance. In my research, those companies that had a continuous process, regardless of whether or not they included ratings, they were significantly more likely to achieve their desired outcomes than companies that had an annual or a semi-annual process. So those of you out there who said that you had an annual process, companies that have moved to this more continuous process are getting more of what they want out of their process. So let's talk about a few things on this graphic. So here we see, this is kind of like quarterly or more frequent. When I say continuous, I think quarterly actually isn't frequent enough. I think most organizations who are truly doing a continuous process are meeting monthly, if not weekly, with their employees, but certainly monthly. And I have kind of a traditional process set up here around plan and align your goals, so set your goals, and then there's coaching that goes on throughout the year. Here I have coach and development in the middle of the year. There's nothing wrong with setting development goals at the beginning of the year to support the goals that you're trying to achieve. I move this to the middle of the year simply to make sure that it got the focus and attention that development planning deserves. It might be a strategy you might think about. But really what's going on here is all throughout the year, people are getting feedback. You're tracking your progress against your goals. You're maybe adjusting your goals to meet changing business needs. So there's a lot that's happening all throughout the year. Now, the research supporting goal motivation theory is literally bulletproof. It's kind of like the only thing in social science that we can repeatedly prove over and over again. Setting specific, challenging goals at the right level of complexity, where employees are engaged in the process and they buy into those goals. And then people get regular ongoing feedback on progress towards those goals. That helps people to achieve more than if people set kind of vague goals or kind of do your best. There is strong research evidence that tells us that having goals alone won't motivate performance. Employees need ongoing feedback on progress for goals to be motivating. And that's generally where the whole goal motivation theory breaks down, because people aren't getting that ongoing feedback towards progress. Also, over half of the companies in our study were employing stretch goals, and those that did were significantly more likely to achieve their desired outcomes. My third recommendation is to create a performance feedback culture. Now, most organizations report that they are starting to communicate more frequently about performance. And 50% say that they're at least providing feedback quarterly, 50%. But as we know, managers just aren't very good at it. I previously shared in the intro the research from Gallup that says only 23% of employees feel that they're getting meaningful feedback. And this research is probably why. 58% of companies rate their managers as only fair in this skill. In fact, almost 15% of our participating companies said their managers were actually poor at providing feedback and coaching their employees. But in our study, we found that companies that rate their managers as actually being skilled at providing feedback were significantly more likely to achieve their desired outcomes. Jerry Ledford and Ben Schneider conducted some research while they were at USC's Center for Effective Organizations on the role of a performance feedback culture on business results. So what is a performance feedback culture? They define it as one where managers feel compelled to deliver meaningful feedback, because leaders communicate the importance of feedback and they role model providing feedback to others. The company provides training on how to provide feedback in an enabling and supportive manner. And managers are recognized and rewarded for providing feedback and coaching to employees. And employees are taught to ask for it. So in our study, we found that companies that gave feedback more often were significantly more likely to report that they had achieved their intended outcomes. This Ledford and Schneider research from the Center for Effective Organizations shows that those companies that engage in a performance feedback culture are more likely to achieve better business results. So I love this data because it's really great to use with your leadership team to convince them that we need to focus on this. So here's how to read this. They broke up companies by those who had the most practices in terms of a performance feedback culture, the next third and the bottom third. And regardless of how you decide to measure business performance, whether it be based on net profit margin, return on investment, return on assets, which is how profitable a company is relative to its total assets, or return on equity, which is a measure of profitability relative to total shareholder equity. We can see here that those companies that had a performance feedback culture performed better. Now, earlier I shared that the half-life of skills is a business imperative because employees need to continuously learn and grow. So it's important that we leverage performance management to create a learning organization. And this is really consistent with prior research from the Institute for Corporate Productivity that said that managers in high-performing companies were twice as likely to execute against development plans for their employees. We found that companies that view their development plan as an important part of the process were significantly more likely to achieve positive outcomes. And earlier I shared that over half of our study participants felt that ratings were responsible for disengagement and demotivation. You guys agreed with that. There's still a lot of debate about whether or not eliminating ratings is a good thing or a bad thing. In our study, we actually found that to be kind of noise in the system. It's actually about something much bigger. It's about continuous feedback and coaching. Ratings themselves don't add value other than facilitating other talent management processes. In my experience, and this has been echoed by other researchers, companies that have eliminated ratings have done this to send the signal that they are focusing more on the dialogue, on providing feedback, on having ongoing conversations. So you can't use a crutch of a rating. But if you are going to have ratings, our research shows that specificity is actually important. So providing one global rating isn't as good as providing a rating on each goal or each behavior that you have embedded in your system. Our biggest problem with ratings is that compensation is driving your performance management bus. Given small budgets and the fact that knowledge workers are more intrinsically motivated, our pay for performance have really limited effectiveness. So we know that this isn't really working, but it tends to be the focus of your programs. We need to transform how we motivate and reward performance. We need to disconnect performance management from your compensation systems. We need to move towards motivating without money and managing compensation differently. So what do I mean by motivating without money? We need to focus on progress, right? Goal setting, it's really important to talk to people about the progress that they're making towards their goals. That is very motivating. What kind of impact am I having on our goals, on the team, on the company's performance, on our customers, et cetera? Belonging, really important. I'm part of a team. I'm getting it done for everybody. People want to belong to something that matters. Purpose. We've heard so much about purpose and meaning at work today. Those are things that our knowledge workers find motivating. Having autonomy, being able to make the decisions about how I proceed with the work that I do is very motivating. And of course, mastery, and kind of that's why development planning is so important. Being able to master a subject, being able to increase my competence is actually very motivating. For those of you who are familiar with Dan Pink's work and his book Drive, you'll see purpose, autonomy, and mastery are those three key things that he says drive motivation in a company. And then we need to manage compensation differently. We need to pay employees fair relative to the market. That is making cost of living increases. We need to pay people for the skills that they bring to our organization. And if those are hot skills in the marketplace, we need to make sure that those employees are getting a premium. But compensation is really about paying people to do their job. And, our attempts at pay for performance really aren't moving the needle. So making sure that we're paying people a fair wage, keeping up with inflation, and making sure that we're staying on top of what are the hottest skills is important. Grow people's pay over time. Maybe have narrower bands around, kind of how we think about how people's skills are contributing. Or maybe there's a lot of movement towards skill-based management of work and pay within organizations. So as I gain new credentials, I can increase my pay. And as I said before, it's not all about what I achieve as an individual. It's really about the work that our team does, maybe our department, maybe it's the company. So leveraging more team and company-based incentives and rewards is really, I think, appropriate for our companies today. And then using other non-financial rewards. I will tell you that a manager's feedback to an individual about their performance is more meaningful and memorable long-term than any kind of bonus you might give them in their pay. So there are 4 things to I recommend for designing a process to enable great performance. Move more towards a continuous process, make goals central, create a feedback culture, create a learning organization, and transform how we motivate and reward talent. So I'm going to close here on sharing my new model for performance enablement. The foundation of this is really setting context for employees, providing guidance and direction about what's most important for the company and why it's important. The why is especially important in setting context for employees. So here's where we set challenging goals, right? And to achieve those goals, managers have to enable performance by providing coaching, feedback, or feed forward, and any kind of support where we're removing obstacles for employees. And then the final element is development, because we need to be continuously increasing people's skills. So this ongoing process creates a virtuous upward spiral that helps individuals and teams build the resources that they need and the capabilities that they need to maintain motivation and confidence to sustain performance. And I believe this model of performance enablement will help create alignment within the company. It increases motivation, it influences progress, and builds increased capability. So I know that many of you have maybe more traditional organizations, and a lot of what I've said is kind of maybe pushing the envelope for you. So the question is, where do you start? And I have 4 really simple things. One is, as you've seen from the data, train your managers on how to provide more effective feedback. Include at least quarterly touch bases if you can't have more frequent conversations. This isn't about rating and reviewing performance. It's about discussing progress, providing support and coaching. Create some kind of recognition program where you can recognize people for outstanding performance. It doesn't have to be a monetary program. And then focus more on development planning. And whether you move it to a mid-year process so you can provide more focus on it, the research really shows that focusing more on development works. So Sri, I spent a lot of time talking. I know we have about 10 minutes left to take some questions from the audience, but as people are popping those questions in there, I'd love for you to share. I know Engagedly has what they call their E3 model for performance, and I know it aligns with this performance enablement model. Could you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'm happy to, without doing a big sales pitch on Engagedly. When we looked at performance and we asked the question when we were building Engagedly is, what is the purpose of performance management? And it is not to review and rate people. That is not the purpose. That is a goal towards something else. And the real purpose, as you mentioned, and this is going back 6-7 years ago, right? The goal was to drive better performance. And that was the entire framework based on which Engagedly product and the solutions were built upon. It's like, what can we do to drive performance? So we looked at all the research data. It said, hey, higher engagement drives performance, develop people drives performance, giving timely feedback drives performance, having one-on-ones with your managers drives performance. There's all these factors, recognition, all these different factors drive performance. Obviously, you need to do performance reviews and goal setting and things like that, but that's not the end game. That is part of the process. And that's why we developed this E3 model, which is the framework for our product, which is engage, enable, and execute. So that's the engagement of people. So there's tools and modules for driving engagement and measuring engagement. Enablement is all about employee development. So that could be coaching, mentoring, learning management, skill development, things of this nature, including feedback. And then the execution is really about your business execution, your execution of your business strategy. And that's really about goal setting, aligning your goals. And performance reviews, we put it in that part, actually, because it's really focusing on the business execution, because your performance review process really should align with that in our perspective. So I hope that clarified without too many buzzwords and confusion there.
That's great. Thanks for sharing that. And I see we do have a number of questions in here, so I might start addressing them. We have Abby, who has said that her company has moved to a 3-point rating scale, which is certainly better than trying to get at that 5 or 7 or lower 10-point rating scale. And it's not meeting expectations, meeting expectations, and exceeding expectations. And do I have any recommendations for how not to demotivate people with that? Meeting expectations is just a term that turns employees off, I have to say. And so it may be in the words that you use. Doing my job is performing well as expected. So it might be in the language that you use, because I do think that, and one other strategy here is, don't design your performance management process to manage out poor performers. Design it for supporting and engaging and driving performance with your high performers, and have a separate process to deal with those individuals who are low performers. Some companies like Juniper Networks had moved to you're either a J player, so you're performing well as expected, or you're not. And then they really dealt with people who were in kind of high profile positions, dealing with that from managing where they're paid relative to the market. So those are some ideas.
One idea I was thinking about also, and you can tell me this is a harebrained idea or a good idea, is using maybe colors. Maybe green is your meet expectations, and maybe amber or something else is not meeting expectations, and maybe a gold star or something like that. That might be one way to take away the words and just, green is good. that's just a universal language.
Yeah,
So
and that's certainly another way of approaching it. Jackie asks if I support a cost of living increase. Absolutely. Many of the companies that I've worked with where we've eliminated performance ratings and their direct tie to compensation, we have used cost of living increases with the communication that we're paying you fair relative to the market and we're keeping you up to date. And today, I'm sorry, that's really painful because, inflation and everything's going up really high. But yes, I do support that. Absolutely.
So one question Karine asks, I think is a good one here. What data do you use to inform succession or promotion decisions if no data from performance reviews?
Yeah, and that's a question we get asked a lot, right? Because I think a lot of the ratings and how we use performance management today is really driven to support that really other talent management processes. There's still a place for kind of a 9 box for doing talent reviews that inform succession planning and other processes like that. In my experience, you don't need to have a rating per se to talk about whether somebody is, performing at, the next level, whether they're, performing as expected or not performing as well. You can do that in a talent review type session that has nothing to do with the ongoing conversation you're having with somebody about their pay. It's not about a shadow rating per se, but how many of you are telling your employees kind of what's happening in the succession management process as you kind of really look at all the employees and who are your highest potentials? Because potential is something that is very different from performance, and that weighs and should weigh more heavily in those kinds of conversations.
In the promotion conversations. Yeah. There's one question, there's a couple of them that are related to managers. The managers are not trained to give good feedback. And then another one related is what assessments can people get to determine managers' abilities. I think we have just a fundamental problem of people getting promoted because they're great individual performers and then they expect to be promoted. And I don't know if this is related to this discussion or not. I know we only have 3 more minutes. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Edie.
Well, I totally agree with you. I think a big part of the problem is that we promote people because they're really great individual contributors as opposed to having the skills to manage talent. So that's kind of problem number 1. And number 2 is, kind of going back to that research on a performance feedback culture, you have to train managers about how to do this. Leaders have to role model it. So there's this entire kind of ecosystem around the importance of feedback. You have to talk about the importance of providing feedback. And it has to be kind of a well-accepted practice within the organization. So I think going back to some of that research about, how do I create a performance feedback culture is really important. But training obviously is hugely needed because employees aren't getting meaningful feedback. And that's just really because our managers don't know how to do it.
Yeah, it's just a universal problem, especially with the resignations. There's these vacancies, and now you got to promote people up. It's just a universal problem. Okay, I think we are towards the end of the call. Is it? And if we need, I think we are done here, Hester. So thank you so much for having us. Thank you, Edie. This is so much good wisdom. A lot of the things we need to reiterate again and again, because as much as research supports your assertions, I think there are a lot of companies who are struggling to accept it and get their leadership to accept it. So thanks for doing this.
Thank you so much. I've really appreciated being part of your journey today. And reach out to Sri or I if you have any additional questions. And I hope you have a great rest of your day, rest of your sessions.
Thank you.
I'd like to thank our presenters as well as all of you for joining us today. If you'd like to view this webcast again, the archive recording will be available on the HR.com website within 24 hours. The webcast credit will show on your HR.com account within 2 business days, and we'll also send you an email with your credit information. Your feedback is important to us. Please take a moment to fill out the exit survey that opened in a new browser page on your computer. This concludes our webcast. Enjoy the rest of your day.